people will say things because they feel that you want to hear them or because they think they are true, but they'll be lying to you at the end of the day. Every person is biased. We're human beings. So to me, it's more about knowing how to filter these out, or rather how to identify what's a certain thing someone tells you that's based on their feelings and thoughts, and what's information that's coming directly from the customer. You can't really know what to say if you don't know who you'll be talking to.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri. This is the show where we chat with B2B SaaS folks, marketers, product leads, growth owners, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' mind. We unpack how they think, how they research, and how they shape messages that actually move the needle. No fluff, just systems, insight, and strategy you can actually use. Quick note before we dive in. This podcast isn't sponsored. It's supported by Conversion Alchemy, my own consulting business. So if you're listening and thinking, I wonder how aligned our messaging actually is, check out the Message Market Fit Scorecard. It's a free diagnostic tool I built to help B2B SaaS teams pinpoint exactly where their messaging might be breaking down. You'll find the link in the show notes. I'm super excited about my guest today, Vassilena Valchanova. Vassi is a content marketing strategist and brand messaging expert with over 15 years of experience helping SaaS products and e-commerce stores. In this episode, we chat about the difference between positioning and messaging, her framework for creating effective brand messaging, how to extract valuable insights from internal teams, her approach to using AI for consistent brand voice, and much more. Let's dive right in. Hey, Vassilena, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Good to have a fellow messaging strategist, copywriter in the house. I'm super curious about processes and some of your methodologies as well. I always like sharing and learning from others. I want to start with a bit of a bigger philosophical question in a way. So let's say that you are starting a project, a messaging project. You're basically ready, you just need to dive in. What's the first question that you ask yourself before diving into the work?
Wow. I guess before starting to even think about messaging, there are a couple of things that would generally go over with a client, or if I'm working for part of an in-house team with our team. And probably the most important of these is, do we have a clear idea of who our target market is? Because you can't really know what to say if you don't know who you'll be talking to. So essentially, this is probably the first thing where I would go. The one thing is the audience, who are we talking to? And also, what's the broader positioning? So when we're talking about messaging, like sometimes I'd hear people use positioning and messaging interchangeably, but the positioning bit is more focused on figuring out what space you're occupying in the market. So it's more of a strategic question that needs to come before figuring out what you want to say and so on, because who you want to position yourself against, what are people even thinking about when they think of you in terms of what competitors do they compare you with. So only knowing that can you really know, okay, so I'll be talking to these people, I need to tell them these broader things. So this is the messaging that we want to build around that.
One thing that I see and one question that I ask a lot of my clients is when we start a project is, who do you help? And one thing that I see is that most of the times, 90% of the times, they always start with saying we help mid-market companies like 200, 5,000, 1,000 people, basically the firmographics, but they never speak about the actual persona that they help. Is that something that happens to you as well?
Yeah, definitely, all the time. And there are two specific scenarios that I see play out quite often, especially when it comes to B2B clients. The first one would be just what you've been talking about. So being clear on the type of company that we want to attract, but not being clear on who within that company forms our, as we call it, the buying committee. So who will be the person who first learns about our product and then introduces it to the rest of the team who's actually making the final decision. What do we need to tell each of these individuals? Because there are oftentimes like even 4 or 5 different people involved in making that decision and presenting it to whoever is, giving us the budget in the end to hire us as a service. And the other thing that I would often see is that people are completely not clear, or at least not discerning enough on the exact type of customer that they want to attract. And I recently heard this concept called the bullseye customer. It's designed by this guy called Michael Margolis, who works in Google Ventures. And I was just listening about it in a podcast. I'm obviously not going to be able to do justice to this conversation because it's something I'm currently learning about. But I was excited to hear that someone is being like, no, you have to go through this whole process in order to really know who that type of customer is. Because especially when you're just starting out, you can't really service 5, 6 individual ICPs. You need to start someplace, and start someplace very specific.
Yeah, and I like that it came from someone with experience at Google. You might think, oh, they think about people as numbers. But if the guy says, no, you have to be specific, it means that it's important.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
One thing that I really like about your experience reading on your profile and everything, you got experience in e-commerce, SaaS, luxury design as well. And I wanted to ask, are there things that you've seen that are universal about messaging in those industries? And what are things that are very specific?
Um, Frankly, thinking about the patterns you can see across all of these individual type of projects I've worked with, or customers, is the fact that time and again it's all about the specific type of customer you want to attract. And I've had even like projects who are seemingly similar. So let's say two clients who are working in e-commerce, who are working in the consumer electronic space, who have massively different target markets. So in one case, we'd be targeting hardcore gamers, and we'd be selling them like a mouse for 200 euro or something like that. In the other case, we will be attracting more of a lifestyle audience, and the focus there would be specifically about design and color schemes and like how this fits in your everyday life. So think that the thing that seems to be true again and again is that you can't really take something and apply it in a new project. You need to have this type of open mind and be very mindful about your own particular biases as a strategist or as a researcher, because you really need to treat every single project as its own separate thing. So no matter if we're talking about luxury design in one case and e-commerce in the other, or we're talking about two e-commerce projects, is still massively different.
Yeah, yeah. Curious, as a service provider myself, was it a choice for you not to specialize and niche down, or is it something that you like the variety of the projects, or why?
It's funny for you to say that, because in my mind, I have severely niched down from when I was starting to do freelance. So essentially, my background is pretty broad. I've always been either one of the most senior marketing people on a team, or one of the first hires who had to be doing all of it.
Yeah.
So I frankly done like with some very minor specific exclusions. I don't know, like I haven't done technical SEO, but other than that, I've done PPC, I've done CRO, I've done content marketing, I've done social media management, I've done community building, I've done affiliates, yada, yada, yada. In 2019, when I left the startup I was working at the time and decided to go freelance, the first thing that I started to do was like present myself as a full stack marketer, because I thought that this would be like the way to go. But gradually over time, I saw that I was first off more passionate about some types of projects compared to others. And also, there are so many amazing experts out there where I feel that I wouldn't be the best person to do PPC, let's say. There are some way smarter people than me who are keeping up at the forefront of this marketing specialization. And it wouldn't serve my customers right to tell them, hey, I can do this for you, if I'm not 100% up there at the top level. So as time went by, I started removing certain parts of my marketing specialization and be like, no, I don't do that, to where I arrived at my current focus, which is content marketing and brand messaging. So I like to say that I help people make words work. all about the wording you have, even if you're doing, video content or something like
Yeah.
that, you're still starting off with a script. So I've always been mindful about this idea of like how we communicate, how we use words to express something, to create a connection, to build trust. And this is where I'm currently at. So over time, I've niched down quite a bit of the type of customers I work with. Currently, my focus is mainly in B2B. On the one hand side, in tech companies, SaaS products that are more complex and needs a lot more help with defining the way we speak about that
Yeah.
product or that solution, which is where messaging comes in. And also, I work with a lot of B2B services businesses, be it individual consultants or consultancy agencies, where again, it's all about that way of using words to shape trust. So it's again about messaging, but in a more slightly less techy, more human connection type
Yeah.
of way. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is where I'm currently at.
Yeah. Just for context and also for the audience to understand your process, because a lot of times when someone talks about positioning, messaging, it's a bit hairy-fairy. So can you walk us through what a typical project looks like for you, like a high level?
Yeah, of course. Depending on where the company is starting at, we would often go through the whole flow of positioning, messaging, and copywriting. So, just to give people an idea of what I mean about these positioning, as we discussed at the start, that's about more of the strategic considerations. Who is our target audience? Who are we going against toe to toe when people are comparing us to other solutions? And this may be another service, another tool out there, or it may very well be we're going to get an intern to do it. So you need to know what you're positioning yourself against. This is where we'll define our target market. This is where we'll say, okay, compared to these individual competitors that we have, this is how we fare against them. This is where we're going ahead in this specific scenario. And it might as well turn out that we have, let's say, three top competitors, and for each one of them, we have a different way of positioning ourselves in a winning way. So with one of them, it may be, oh, we are more specialized in terms of the verticals we're serving. With another, it may be, oh, we have this additional feature that these guys don't have, and it's very critical for your type of business or whatever. Once we have the positioning out of the way, we focus on the messaging bit, which means we know who we're talking to and what broadly we're going against. So what do we need to say to these people to make sure that they understand our value, that they actually see and are convinced that we are the best solution for them? So when it comes to messaging, probably the biggest misconception that I see is that it's, oh, like you're gonna write stuff that we can put on a page, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very clear about this, and usually what I when I work with clients, I give them this format that I call messaging framework. We could probably link to that in the show notes because I have
Yeah,
like a
sure.
whole detailed blog post about it. But just to give you like a quick idea, it's the core value pillars that we present. So what are the mix of, it may be functionalities, it may be company capabilities, it may be team characteristics that are going to be useful to people and give them this specific ideal outcome that they want to get out of it. And then this is written in a broader way, meaning that we focus on like, how can we prove this? So what are specific facts and figures that we can use in this situation? We focus on what it is exactly. That like, if we say something like an all-in-one platform, what do we actually mean by that? Like, we want to make sure that everyone on the team understands what we're talking about when we call ourselves an all-in-one platform. And this is the most tired example that I
Yeah.
can give you, and I would never go with something like that in a real project, but just as an example here. And then finally, we also create a couple of different framings, ways you can actually talk about this particular core characteristics or key value pillar, as I call them. And this is the breadth of things that we cover when we're working on messaging. So, what do we want to tell people? What is it? How do we prove it? And what are some ways in which we can express that
Mm.
information?
Yeah.
And then the next bit is copywriting, which is the actual, like, how do we take these core messages and how do they live on a landing page for this specific ICP in this specific situation?
Yeah. Awesome. One thing that I want to ask, because you mentioned that clients sometimes like misinterpret messaging. What's one question you wish more clients would ask you before starting a messaging project, or something that you see they don't really dive into and they should?
I think probably the one thing that I see when working with clients is that they sometimes get hung up on specific phrases or that they want to use
Yeah.
that are not important to their customers at all. And I'm saying this not from the position of I'm the expert and I know better. I'm saying this because like when we do actual customer research, we see that people just don't. They
Yeah.
just don't care about it. My best example is something like, do we call this a platform or do we call it a tool? Or do we call it something else? Customers rarely care about whether it is a platform or a tool, and they would use these words interchangeably when they're talking about your product. So one question we usually start with when we're doing actual customer research for messaging purposes, I would ask people how so if you were describing our product to a colleague or a peer or a friend, depending on the product category, how would you describe it? And we take note of the words that people are using. And there would be a massive variety, and people would very rarely put their focus and attention on whether it is a tool or a and in internal discussions I would see people spend massive amounts of time on something like that. So whenever we arrive at a situation like that, and it can be something more specific obviously, when we have like a discussion like that's dragging on for 20 minutes on end or something like that, I'd be like, okay guys, like I see that there's some different opinions living here about like what's the best way of going with this. And I think that the best way we can solve this is to actually turn back to customers and turn back to the research and find the answers there rather than continue discussing the merits of one over the other, because it may very well turn out that this isn't something we should be spending our energy on.
Yeah. Well, this is super interesting because it's happening to me as well right now. I have this client, which basically they're still not sure whether it's a platform or a solution with services, managed services. So we were asking customers. One thing that I sometimes I have a challenge with, and I try to avoid my own bias and avoid leading them to the right answer. That what I think is the right answer. I ask them, okay, can you describe what would you say? And sometimes, as you said, they don't say, oh, it's a solution or it's a platform. So what are some of your ways that you use to extract from them those kind of words that you think you need to get clear on?
Yeah, in different situations it will be different. So one big question is like, what do we have as researchers, as strategists, what can we work with? Because sometimes I would go into a project and they would have a huge database of their current customers that we can actually slice and dice and say, okay, let's define our core target market, let's define the best type of customers and just reach out to a few of them and do some interviews. In other situations, especially in B2B, it's very hard to get access to the actual decision maker, because if it's a complex enterprise solution, you can't ask, hey, give me the contacts of the CTO of
Yeah,
those 5 companies you're currently working with and let me chat to them. Like people are
yeah,
much more guarded with, and it's not about guarding the information or anything like that. It's that they feel that, oh, the time, quote unquote, of that high level person would sort of sully that relationship that we currently have with them. So I've seen, especially sales led companies, sales managers are very mindful of not disturbing the client. In this situation, we would go with an external, of an internal rather discussion. And we will be like, okay, like, let me meet with your salespeople then, because they are obviously holding these relationships and they are talking to customers. So then it becomes about extracting secondhand information almost, which has its own particular challenges. And we like focusing the challenges you need to solve depending on who you're interviewing to
yeah,
get the messaging information. It's its own big topic.
yeah. So when it comes to extracting this voice of customer from the teams, from the client internal teams, especially sales, success. Are there any red flags that you look for in their responses that tell you maybe these guys are biased? It's not like the actual truth, or any examples they have?
Yeah, I think that every person is biased. We're human beings and we have our own internal biases. Also know that I'm biased when I
Yeah.
go into that process. So to me, it's more about knowing how to filter these out, or rather how to identify what's a certain thing someone tells you that's based on their feelings and thoughts, and what's information that's coming directly from the customer. The best way that I found to do that is to create a script for these interviews with salespeople that are heavily focused on past experience. I know you interviewed Georgiana Laudi
Yeah.
recently. I'm sure she spoke about jobs to be done and the way we do interviews with jobs to be done. And the focus there is all tap into past experiences. People will say things because they feel that you want to hear them, or because they think they are true, but they'll be lying to you at the end of the day, even if it's unintentional. But if you ask about what has happened in the past, they will be much more truthful because they will really be telling you the details. So an example of that is usually when I start talking to salespeople, I would first try to get these biases out of the way, because I know that they're coming into the conversation thinking, oh, like I have so much vast experience and I'm gonna now synthesize that experience for her and just give her the cliff notes. And I will let them do that at the start just so get it
Clear
out of
that
the
out.
way. And then yeah, I'll ask questions like, okay, compared to the biggest competitors, who are the biggest competitors in your point of view? Compared to these competitors, how do we fare? What's our advantage against competitor A, competitor B, competitor C? Oftentimes I would get amazing information out of that portion of the conversation as well. Don't get me wrong, but I'd do after that is start talking to them. Okay, like thinking through your past, like 5 or 10 individual sales conversation with high value prospects. So people that we've arrived at the point where we were in a short list of different solutions. Whether or not they went with us doesn't really matter that much. But think about, I want you to hold these conversations in your head when you answer these next questions. And then I would ask, so in these particular situations, who are the competitors that came to that last stage of discussion? 3, 4, 5 individual solutions. And then what would happen is sometimes there will be this discrepancy that I see from what they think and what they told me at the beginning the biggest competitors are, and what comes out of the discussions with actual clients. Especially when it's a highly contested B2B category, people are very adversarial, and people in general, they have this temperament where they're like go-getters, they're very active and passionate about what they do. Most of them would have this one big enemy that they're fighting in their head, and they will be heavily focused on that one competitor. But in actual conversations, other like prospective customers would tell them about these 4 other ones, and they would be almost completely blind to this until it comes up in our conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I would love for the listeners, especially if they work like in house, to get an idea for what kind of insights you can get if you externalize your thoughts. Do you have any surprising examples, maybe, or something that you learned from internal teams that then you applied to messaging?
Yeah. So probably like the one thing that has surprised me in the past and keeps surprising me every time is the amount of um, diplomacy and politicking that you need to do in order to get your job done as a
Yeah.
researcher. I'd often say these to clients is as an external consultant, like my value comes from 2 main places. The first one is that I'm more objective. So
Mm.
I don't know a lot about your product. I haven't met your competitors on the sales floor of a conference where we shook hands and smiled, but there was this tension happening behind. I haven't been with the ups and downs of like winning and losing sales deals. So I can keep my cool head in the midst of that conversation and give you more objective insights compared to what you're already seeing. And the second big thing is what I'm getting at. It's the fact that if we started working on a project, which means you've dedicated a budget to this is already a great thing because it means that you're actually going to follow through with it because you've paid for it.
Yeah.
So
Skin in the game.
there's this, yeah, exactly. There's this, whenever I've tried, because I sometimes work with customers on more of a done with you type of project. And whenever I had to coach them through on how to get the attention of their sales team to do these internal discussions, to get this work actually started and slotted within their quarterly goals or whatever, it's like oftentimes the biggest issue that we're facing is that people are just not paying attention and they don't think that this is something as important as it is. So it falls in the not urgent but important category that gets left by the wayside. But when they're paying on external consultants, it's already like much easier for them to go to their sales team and be like, guys, like we have hired this person, we have a contract, it's official, and she's gonna come to you and ask some questions.
Yeah.
And this is when salespeople are paying a lot more attention. I've had this. We tried to do this with one customer last year. So they wanted to go at it with a moral approach. So they went ahead and asked their salespeople, "Hey, we'll give you a series of prompt questions, and you can either write down your thoughts, or even better, just record a short video where you talk through your thoughts about this thing." And this would have taken them a lot less time than setting up an interview with me. But what turned out was that 3 weeks passed and no one did their homework, quote unquote. So we switched gears midway through and they're like, oh, like now we're actually bringing in that person, our external consultant to talk to you. Here's her calendar. Please book a time within the next 2 weeks to slot an interview with her. And this is when we actually got some information out of people. And the cool thing with that is that all throughout the rest of that project, which was led by and completely owned by the marketing team, these people still felt that we're interested in knowing what's going on and how this is going to be implemented. Probably heard of this bias called the IKEA effect, where if you participated in creating something, you hold higher value of it.
Yeah.
So the same thing, when you get them involved in the process, then they're like, oh, like I'm wondering what's going through with this. How are we going to implement it? Insights that they found throughout the whole project, which is awesome.
Yeah, you mentioned the one thing to, yeah, you mentioned how you establish trust by basically, I think one thing they do very well is the telling them, I'm here to learn, I'm not the expert, right? Do you have other ways to establish trust, especially because it comes to mind, especially when you work on complex projects, like, I don't know, data management, infrastructure stuff, and you don't know anything about that stuff at the beginning, at least? How do you
Yeah.
establish trust, especially when you speak with technical people?
Yeah. What I would do is there is this very fine line between into the conversation as a newbie in general and going into the conversation as a newbie in their industry, but an expert in her own right. And I don't want to go into the whole issue that's going to be, but I feel that sometimes a male dominated space tech sales and being a
Yeah.
woman, that's also like a part
Yeah.
of that conversation. So when I go in, I try to be very non-threatening about their industry. So I'm like, yeah, tell me more about this. Explain to me what this is. I have no idea. Like what I usually do, because obviously I do my own research, and with the clients I work with, before we even arrive at the point of the interviews, I'm like, give me like the whole overview of the industry. Where can I learn about that? Where can I know more about the type of products you're selling? So I have a basic understanding about it, so I can hold that conversation. And what I would say would be something along the lines of, hey, like I know enough about that industry to be dangerous, but not enough to be an actual expert. So you have to lead me through it. But then at the same time, as we're going in the discussion, I try to keep this, I try to give them an idea that I'm being mindful and specific about what we are doing here. And I have expertise in extracting these insights from teams that are highly technical, that are very experienced like they are. I would sometimes depend, like it something that comes up in conversation, but it may be that I'd say, oh, like in other projects I've worked on, we found this and that, and give them some idea of the biases that we've uncovered in conversation. I tell them some amusing yet non-specific insights that we found in conversation like that. So just that they get the idea of, oh, like she's very good at what she does, but she needs my help with this specific industry. And then it's more of a helpful conversation between peers, which is, I think, the best environment to have these things in.
Yeah, I found this super interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking, it's the same that you do with AI. You have to point it to a specific area of its vast knowledge to make it give it you like the right information. So very interesting. Works like a human, actually.
Yeah.
So we spoke about your messaging framework, and that's all good when you also write the copy for the website and some other assets. But have you seen some mistakes from companies implementing your messaging framework, if any?
I think that the biggest mistake is not actually following through with it. Because what will sometimes happen, and I give clients the choice of, depending on how big their internal marketing team is, one thing may work better than the other. So I'm very flexible on this. We could work on copy together, especially for our first project after we finish with the messaging, just so they get a better idea of how they can implement this to its full force. Or the other thing we do it would be to coach the team through implementing it themselves. So I have my go-to process of, once we have that messaging framework done, how do we keep track of it? So a few things that we usually focus on, and I think that this will be applicable to anyone, even if you've done your messaging research and you have your core messaging figured out already. I think these can be helpful. The one big thing is making sure that everyone in the team is aware of how we arrived at that information, what it is, and how they can use it, where they can find it as a fourth one. So we do a quick video, or I get invited to a hands-on meeting with the team, or they do it themselves, but they basically present to the whole team in some shape or form what we've done in terms of research, because this improves the trust in the output that we've created. Oftentimes people who are especially non-marketing team members, they would be like, oh, like you just wrote that because you saw this on a competitor's website, or just have this aesthetic that you follow, that you thought that this would be that just sounds nice. And we try to be like, no, this is like almost like a scientific project. Like, it's research and it's grounded in fact, and these are the steps that we went through to get to this. The second step would be actually giving them the information. So here's the messaging framework, here's how it's split up, here's how you can use it with like even team specific examples. So if we're talking to customer success, we'll be like, here are some ways in which you can use these messages when you're talking to your customers. Another case would be obviously sales calls. Here's how you use that and how you can implement that within the sales deck that you usually use to give demos to clients with. And then the other element to that would be having a clear space where they can access that information and where they can find it. So we'll have one place where we have the whole messaging framework presented to them. We would have key deliverables. If we've worked together on copywriting, we would have, let's say, an example landing page or an example sales deck that we've developed together with the sales team that they can use. And in the end, I want to be very clear on, first, get them interested in what we've done, get their trust that they know that this is something that makes sense, that it has been designed in a way that's logical, and it's really something that they can use, and then give them access to the actual materials so they know where to come back to that. And then the final bit would be to try to implement specific checks, at least for the first couple of months of implementing that, especially for the marketing team. I think that's very important. If they're designing a new landing page, if they're writing up a new blog post or creating a new white paper, there isn't still like the habit isn't there to go back to the messaging framework and be like, oh, we have these 5 things that we want to hit every time when we talk about the product. Have we managed to do that within this particular piece of content? And this may be, again, it's very dependent on the process of the team, but it will be some form of either a checklist or someone on the team who actively serves as the chief messaging officer in this particular time period to go back and have these conversations with the team and be like, okay, this is how we actually implement this in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to back up your decisions, but at the same time disclose your reasoning in a like a gradual way because you don't want to overwhelm them with here's the all the research that we've done. Dive in. You want to kind of give them the
Yeah.
structure, and then they can like look where you find like it. When it comes to your specific framework, I'm curious, how do you balance the structure of a framework with also allowing for flexibility to speak to different customer personas?
Oh, that's one of my favorite bits. So the first thing is that the way I structured this is it's pretty versatile. So you can have an overall version of the framework, and then you can copy and paste it and say, for this particular ICP, we only focus on these 3. The big issue, especially when it comes to a complex enterprise type of product, is that we end up with, let's say, 5, 6, 7 different key value pillars. You obviously can't talk about 7 different things in a single landing page. That would be craziness.
Yeah.
Like you leave the customer more confused about who you are than when they came to the page. So what we do is these are, let's say, our 7 key value pillars. These 3 are specific to this particular ICP. These 3 are specific to this one. These 2 are specific to this other one, or whatever. And then we would slightly word this differently sometimes if the use case of that ICP is different. If we're talking about a broader category like the flexibility of the platform and how it can work for different type of customers. If I'm talking to, say, if it's some form of an ERP system, if I'm talking to a company that's focused solely on warehouse management, I'll tell them it's very flexible when it comes to the design of your warehouse, the structure, the layers and levels of your whole space, and so on and so forth. If I'm talking to on a big box e-com, I'll tell them, no, this ERP is very focused on how you can actually track the availability of the product and how you can manage different variations of a single product or whatever. So it will still be talking about that core concept of flexibility, but in slightly different ways depending on the ICP.
Yeah.
And for each individual key value pillar, I usually give teams 3 or 4 different ways in which you can word this. One would be if you know that your type of ICP is very logical and very focused on facts, then the way you talk about this key value pillar is all fact driven. What we can say, numbers, stats, whatever. We want to create something that's gonna be shorter and more basic that goes, let's say, on a landing page. Then we have a version that's using the problem agitation solution framework, which is works very nicely for a landing page. Or depending on the different use cases, we will create 4 or 5 individual framings for each of the key value pillars. So it becomes almost like a case where they have a set of blocks that they can use, and then they can build their own Lego out of it.
Yeah, basically referring to the main messaging framework, but then they have these kind of appendixes of like different
Yeah,
ways
yeah,
of saying
exactly.
things. Nice. I wanted to briefly touch on AI because you also run a couple of AI workshops, and I'm always interested in like learning how others use it. Especially you mentioned how you use it to keep voice consistent. Right? What
Yeah.
are some of the ways, and if you can mention some of the tools they use to do that?
Yeah. So I'm pretty basic when it comes to tooling. I use Claude for almost everything that I do. I find that Claude Sonnet is very good when it comes to specifically a consistent brand voice, but ChatGPT is frankly catching up pretty fast. And with the preview version, I found that it's pretty strict in how it implements brand voice. The way I'd go through this is go through existing content and try to extract the brand voice out of it. So if you have blog posts, you can upload them directly. If you have, let's say, LinkedIn content, you can upload that directly. As long as you, depending on the platform, you do some different technical
Yeah.
stuff to get your information extracted from the platform. But end of the day, this is what you want to do. Before I even arrive at that spot, I would prime the AI model that I'm working with to tell me about what it knows about best practices when it comes to brand voice, how, like, what are the different criteria to assess brand voice, what are the different elements of brand voice. So essentially what you're doing in this situation is I like to think as like a warm up for the AI because it has all of that information available in the model implicitly, but you need to direct its attention to something specific. The way you can direct its attention is through the input you give it. It's gonna take into account everything within that single conversation that you're having to generate information in follow-up prompts.
Mm.
So basically, any AI model is essentially a very sophisticated calculator that sort of calculates the probability of what you're telling it come up in a conversation or with other words and phrases that it has within the model.
Yeah.
So if you do a very short and naive type of prompt, like these 5 individual blog posts, tell me what the brand voice of them is, the output is going to be very basic as well. But if you first talk to it a little bit, see what it knows about brand voice, tell it, oh, by the way, like there's this other criteria that I want you to take into account that I think is important. Then when you feed it your information and then you ask it to assess your brand voice, it will give you an output that's based not just on that individual prompt, but also the whole conversation that you've had before that point. So it will be much more high fidelity, much more sophisticated, much more detailed.
Yeah. We.
And yeah,
Yeah.
the
Go
last
ahead.
step of this would be once it tells you about the brand voice, you can then ask it to create a prompt that you can use for future conversations to keep the brand voice consistent information that it provides, which is
Yeah.
super, super helpful if you're distributing that within a larger team or if you just want to be able to have that stashed somewhere if you need to start a new conversation.
Yeah. With Claude, do you use the projects function, like giving it like knowledge, or do you just prompt it?
Yeah, started creating individual projects with. So, for everyone listening who hasn't used Claude, the way Claude is structured from an organizational standpoint is to me superior because my use case is that I have a lot of different clients that I work with. And for each one of them, I need to take into account a different brand voice or a different, even a different industry that we're working with, or whatever. So for each one of these projects, I would have a set of documents that I would upload. And now Claude can actually access Google Docs. So
Yeah.
if you're working within a Google Workspace like I am, it's much easier to do that now. So I can just link it to the brand voice description for an individual client. And whenever I then reference, oh, I want you to do this in the brand voice of the XYZ company, then it would know that to refer back to.
Yeah. When it comes to having companies use AI, especially like if you're working with a client, do you see that they trust it? Do they know about like ways you're using it? Because I'm still unsure whether or not there's resistance for companies to adopt it or not. What are your thoughts?
With the companies I work with, there hasn't been that much resistance to it. There's a lot of interest and a lot of excitement about using
Ah.
it, but there isn't a ton of strategy.
Mm.
And the big part of it, I think, is that you need to create your own processes and tools so that different members of your team can use AI and get similar output out of it. So, one big example, since I'm in the content marketing space, one big example is that you would they would just get a paid ChatGPT account and be like, oh, like you now have ChatGPT, good luck. And they wouldn't give their team any shared expertise or shared documentation on how to do that. And if you think about it, like we have processes for any single thing in marketing, and we need to do the same with AI now. So what we would usually do whenever I'm helping teams with operations, we would have a shared prompt library, and there would also be a shared style guide for sure, and a shared set of basic prompts for common tasks that we do often. For example, one could be writing newsletters, or another could be writing social media content for LinkedIn. We would have like a way to give people, first off, to make it easier for them to do that if they don't feel too confident with using AI, but also, and even more importantly, would give them a way to have an output that's consistent no matter if this person on the team did the work or that person. So this
Yeah.
is probably the most important bit for me now.
Yeah, they need to know that once you give them that tool, they'll be able to replicate the result across the organization.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. My last question is I always like to understand how people think, how their minds work. So you also do organize science events. Can you walk us through like where did it come from and how do you maybe apply the that aspect of your life to messaging?
Yeah. 13 years ago now, a friend of mine, we were working together. So he was a colleague at the time, and he was in sales. I was in marketing. We were working on the same brands together. And we got talking. We figured out we're both sort of science nerds. And at the time in Bulgaria, in my whole country, there really weren't any popular science events organized for adults. Everything was school level, or even events organized for toddlers and small kids and so on. Basically, at one point he was like, we both have an interest in science, we're both curious about this, we've organized a lot of events for the brands that we were representing in Bulgaria. Why don't we take that expertise of event management and apply it to a fun passion project, and we can organize one science event? I was like, sure, that sounds like fun. So 13 years later, we are still organizing these. We have more than 30 events every year, from ranging
Wow.
from different sizes. Our biggest events are full day science forums that have more than 700 or 800 people coming together celebrating beauty and all of science. Because, like, even though I'm not steep deep into academic work, I can still appreciate how cool it is that we as a civilization have managed to figure out so much stuff around us.
Yeah.
And basically, back to the other component of that question, one big thing that we quickly saw that we need to do is to figure out ways in which we can reliably translate science in simpler terms. And this is where that level of being a newbie in a field, but also being an expert in a different one, comes into play again, because we have never been, the expert scientists. Obviously, the speakers that we get know way more about their topic than we do.
Mm.
What we go into the conversation with is curiosity about their field. So we are genuinely passionate and interested about what these people have to share. And also, by now, we know what works for our audience. So we can tell them, oh, this is super interesting. Can you just start from a step before that and actually explain what the basic science about this is? Tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And then you can go deeper into the research you're currently working on about, like, I don't know, the different degrees of sense of taste and smell
Yeah.
that you're currently experimenting with, or whatever.
Nice, I love it. You can basically test and practice your messaging skills in the wild before applying to client work. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Vassi, thank you so much. It's been super helpful. I'm gonna add all the links in the show notes. I know that you have a content marketing and web messaging course as well, which I'll have the link in the show notes. What is that about exactly?
Yeah, a couple of years back, I grew tired of answering the same questions and explaining the same things. And I was also getting pretty antsy because I used to teach at a pretty big local digital marketing account. I stopped that to focus on other work. So I decided to structure a course for myself. It's focused, as you mentioned, on I call it the strategic content and messaging course, because it starts off with what we began our conversation with, figuring out who your customers are and doing the basic customer development and audience research. And then from there on, developing content marketing strategies and developing brand messaging that speaks to these people. So within the course, I take people through, frankly, most of the processes and tools that I use in my day-to-day work with clients. And the cool thing about it is that it's structured as more of a choose your own adventure type of thing. So if you feel that you're most focused on messaging, you can only go through the module on messaging and work on that first. And then maybe at a later point, if you decide to focus more on content marketing, you can get that information as well.
Which is nice for busy teams, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So where people can find you on LinkedIn? Where else are you on other socials?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the biggest place, and I'm the proud author of a weekly newsletter called Marketing Matters. People can get my handpicked selection of current tools, resources, on marketing strategy, brand messaging out of it. I always joke that, and I've actually done the math, so this isn't just like a marketing shtick or anything like that. I read about 180 articles per week, and I give people the top 5 ones from my selection in their inbox every Friday.
Now, where do you find the time, or how do you organize yourself to read 180
I
articles?
actually have a blog post about this.
Oh, cool! So we'll link to that as well.
Yeah, I'm very structured on how I get my information in one place. I use a tool called Readwise Reader that I recommend it. It's a lifesaver. It has all the sites that I usually go to. It has all the newsletters and podcasts that I follow. And from there on out, it's a breeze because you just go through that information, and whatever strikes your fancy, you add to a separate tag, which is called, interestingly enough, newsletter. And then you take out those picks into the weekly edition.
Awesome, Vassi. Thank you so much. It's been great to have you, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks as well.
Thanks so much for listening. If the episode sparked some ideas or made you rethink how you're doing messaging, check out the Message Market Fit scorecard. It's free, quick to complete, and it'll show you exactly where your copy or strategy might be misaligned. You'll find the link in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper or just bounce ideas around, I'm always up for a chat. Hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter @SylvestriChris. And of course, if you enjoyed the episode, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps more people discover it. That's it for this one. See you next time.